My cousin and I were on a road trip from Maine to California. We were driving on a desolate highway in Nebraska. I'm talking about one rest stop or gas station every 120 miles, each one completely isolated with no other buildings in sight. It was about 10:30 p.m. We had decided to switch drivers every 3 hours and planned to stop at a rest area around 2 a.m. to sleep. It was a little after 11 p.m., and given how scarce rest stops were on this route, we agreed to stop at the first one we saw. About half an hour later, we finally spotted one. We took the exit, and as expected, it was a typical middle-of-nowhere rest stop. 2 other cars were parked in front of the doors, slightly off to the side. We got out to use the restroom and walked towards the entrance. We each grabbed the handle of the double doors. They were locked. I turned and looked around for a sign explaining why they were locked. The lights were on inside, and it didn't look closed. I cupped my hands around my face and peered inside. That's when I saw it. A dark red smear was on what I assumed was the door of a small storage room near the back. I suddenly realized I was looking at a large streak of dried blood. My blood ran cold. My cousin started banging on the door, trying to get someone's attention. I stopped him and pointed out the blood on the wall. I watched the color drain from his face as he noticed it. We both turned to head back to the car. As we were getting in, I took a closer look at the other cars in the parking lot. One of them had no license plates, and its rear bumper was practically hanging off. The other was an old pickup truck with an empty gun rack visible in the back window of the cab. We got in the car and drove off. As we were leaving, I saw the rest stop door open slightly. We didn't actually see anyone though. We drove away before anyone came out. We couldn't call the police for at least another hour due to lack of cell service. When we finally managed to get a signal and called, they assured us they would investigate. Several weeks later, I called the state police in the county where we had stopped that night, inquiring about what had happened or what they had found. They said they would look into it and call me back. As far as I know, I never received a call back. I'll be honest, I've probably spent more time chasing women than I'd like to admit. I've had to tone it down a lot since college, partly because of what I'm about to tell you. I went to college in Oregon, and while I haven't been back in a while, when I was there, the culture was very open, and when I say open, I mean sexually. Honestly, this might have been true for other colleges in other states at the time, but I wouldn't really know. It was my junior year, and I had just finished pledging the Delta fraternity. About halfway through the semester, though, I was getting sick of only talking to sorority girls who seemed to know half the guys in every frat. It was honestly a little off-putting, and I started developing a fear that every girl I was interested in had been with several people I personally knew. I tried my luck and created a profile on a new dating app. It wasn't long before I matched with someone whose interests seemed to align with mine. We started talking, and things were going well. After about a week, we made plans to meet up on a Wednesday night at a local cafe called The Break Room. This was actually my favorite cafe in that town because it had arcade video games, and I had been a fan of those since I was a kid. I remember getting there about half an hour early so I could grab a machine for myself. About 45 minutes passed, and I came to terms with the fact that I had probably been stood up. I was trying to decide whether I should salvage the night or just head back to my dorm and study when I received a message. To my surprise, it was Leah, the girl I was waiting for, telling me she had just arrived. I greeted her, and she apologized for being late. We got some drinks, played some games, and got to know each other. She had red hair and seemed a bit shy. I tried to be myself and didn't talk too much. At one point, she asked for my phone number, which I gave her. Almost immediately after, I noticed she was showing me something on her phone. She showed me a series of texts that were apparently sent to her from an unknown number. The messages were very strange and seemed like someone was stalking her. I was confused and a little concerned. Before I could even say anything, she told me she had to go and that she wasn't feeling well. I didn't press it, and we said goodbye. As I was walking back to my dorm, I had a strange feeling. It was like something wasn't right. I decided to do a little more research on Liao. I searched for her name on social media and didn't find much. This was a little odd, but I chalked it up to her being private. A few days later, the police contacted me. They asked me questions about the night I was at the cafe with Liao. They said she had gone missing and they were investigating her case. I told them everything I knew. A few weeks later, Leah's body was found in a wooded park on the outskirts of town. The police announced that she had been murdered. I was shocked and saddened. It took me a while to come to terms with it. This incident changed my perspective on dating and relationships. I realized that I shouldn't easily trust anyone and that I should always be careful. I haven't used dating apps since. Around 2012, I was living in the Brooklyn Heights neighborhood of New York City. I'd always been a night owl, so I often found myself bored after my roommate, who was decidedly not a night person, went to sleep. To pass the time, I used to go for long walks around the Brooklyn Bridge and the nearby piers, spending the time thinking. About 2 years passed like this, walking alone at night, and I never had a reason to feel unsafe. I always joked with my roommates that even the street vagrants in this neighborhood didn't bother anyone, but everything changed in just a few minutes one night. It was a Friday night, around 3:30 in the morning, and I was walking along Columbia Street, near the southern end of the Brooklyn Bridge. It was a relatively quiet night, even for a weekend, with very little traffic and almost no one on foot. The piers, like most nights, were nearly empty. To head back towards my apartment, I turned onto a narrow, dimly lit street heading towards the Red Hook neighborhood. At the far end of the street, under the dim light of a street lamp, I saw the silhouette of a man making strange movements. At first, I thought he might be exercising or stretching, but as I got closer, I realized his movements were more like aimless spinning and swaying. The man was of average height and a somewhat stocky build. He was wearing dark clothes and a wool cap that covered most of his face. He kept turning around and around, waving his arms in a strange way. I decided to cross to the other side of the street to put some distance between us. When I reached the other side, I glanced back and saw that he had stopped and was looking at me. His head was tilted slightly to one side, and his facial expression was unclear. I had an uneasy feeling. I started walking faster, trying not to look at him. After I had walked about a block away, I glanced at the sidewalk for a moment. When I looked back, I didn't see him. For a moment, I felt relieved, but suddenly I saw him just a few meters ahead of me. He had moved incredibly fast, as if he had teleported. My heart started pounding. He was now facing me, shaking his head violently. The light was dim, but I could see that his eyes were wide open and staring at me. He wasn't smiling, but he had a strange and frightening look on his face, as if he was terrified or excited about something. Without saying a word, I started running. He started running after me. I could hear his footsteps behind me. I ran until I reached Columbia Street and the brighter lights. When I looked back, he was gone. I walked the rest of the way home in fear and dread, constantly looking over my shoulder. That night and that frightening face stayed with me for a long time. I never walked on that street that late at night again.